Working at Dollar Tree wasn't the worst job, but it wasn't exciting either. My name is Ryan, and I had been working the night shift for a few weeks now. The store was quiet most nights, with only a few customers trickling in before closing. It was one of those nights where time dragged, and the only sound was the hum of the overhead lights. I was at the register, tapping my fingers on the counter, waiting for my shift to end. It was almost 9 p.m., and I was ready to lock up when the door chimed. A woman walked in, holding something close to her chest. She looked nervous, her eyes darting around the empty store like she was afraid someone was watching. "Excuse me," she said, placing a small pink doll on the counter. "I need to return this." I glanced at the doll. It was one of those cheap ones, plastic with matted yellow hair and bright blue eyes. Nothing special. "Is there something wrong with it?" I asked, reaching for the receipt. The woman hesitated, then leaned in closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "It talks on its own." I almost laughed, but the way she gripped the counter made my stomach tighten. "Like a malfunction?" She shook her head. "Number it whispers, even when it's off, even when there are no batteries." I turned the doll over, checking the back. The battery compartment was empty. I raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, are you sure?" Before I could finish, the lights flickered. The woman gasped, stepping back. "Just take it," she said quickly, shoving the doll toward me. "I don't want a refund. Just keep it." Before I could respond, she spun around and hurried out the door, leaving me standing there with the doll in my hands. I sighed and looked down at it. Its frozen blue eyes stared back at me. "Great," I muttered, placing it on the counter. The second I turned my back, I heard it. A soft, barely there whisper. "Why did you bring me back?" I froze. The store was dead silent except for the faint buzzing of the lights. Slowly, I turned back to the counter. The doll was exactly where I left it, its tiny plastic hands resting on its lap. I shook my head. Maybe I was just tired. Long shifts could mess with my mind. "All right, let's get you back on the shelf," I muttered, picking it up and walking toward the toy section. As I placed it back among the other dolls, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The store wasn't cold, but something about that moment made me uneasy. The other dolls looked normal, but this one, something felt off. I stepped back, taking one last look before turning away. "Ryan." I whipped around so fast my heart nearly burst out of my chest. The whisper was closer this time. It sounded like it came from right behind me. But I was alone. I scanned the store, my breathing uneven. Maybe someone was playing a prank on me, but there was no one here. I was the only employee on shift. The lights flickered again, and I heard a rustling sound, like tiny fingers brushing against plastic. I turned back to the shelf. The doll had fallen forward. I swallowed hard and took a slow step back. "Okay," I said out loud, trying to reassure myself. "Just a coincidence." I forced myself to walk away, but as I reached the front counter, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. It was finally closing time. I rushed through my final tasks, eager to get out of there. The store felt heavier, like the air was pressing down on me. Every little sound made me jump. I grabbed my keys and turned toward the door. Just as I reached for the lock, the lights flickered again. This time, they went out completely. Darkness swallowed the store. I fumbled for my phone, using the screen's glow to guide me. The emergency lights should have kicked in, but they didn't. That's when I heard it again. "Ryan, don't go." My breath hitched. The voice was soft, almost pleading. It came from the toy aisle. I didn't want to look. Every instinct told me to leave, to run, but my body wouldn't move. I turned my phone's flashlight toward the aisle. The doll was no longer on the shelf. It was sitting in the middle of the floor, facing me. I felt my pulse in my ears. My hands trembled as I backed away, my legs weak. Then the front door slammed shut. I rushed to the door, gripping the handle with sweaty hands. It wouldn't budge. I yanked, shoved, even kicked it, but it was like something was holding it shut from the outside. My phone buzzed. A text. Unknown number. Don't turn around. I dropped my phone. The whisper came again, closer this time. Ryan, stay with me. My breath hitched. I didn't want to turn around. I knew what I would see, but something inside me forced me to. The doll was now at my feet. I stumbled back, my hands shaking. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. The doll's lips moved. Let's play. Then it moved. Not like a normal toy. It twitched, jerky, unnatural. Its tiny hands grabbed at my ankle. I screamed and kicked it away, running toward the back storage room. I didn't stop. I slammed the door behind me, my chest heaving. Silence. Then a soft tap. Tap, tap on the other side. I grabbed a broom, holding it like a weapon. My heart pounded as the whispering started again. Come out, Ryan. I wasn't going to let a toy control me. I grabbed the heaviest box I could find and threw it against the door. The whispering stopped. I waited. Minutes passed. Then, nothing. Slowly, I cracked the door open. The doll was gone. I took cautious steps toward the front. The store was quiet again. The door was wide open. I didn't question it. I ran. The next morning, I called in sick. I wasn't going back. But when I checked my phone, my blood ran cold. A single message. A picture of the doll, sitting on my doorstep. And beneath it, a whispering voice recording. Why did you leave me, Ryan? My name is David, and I work the evening shift at Dollar Tree. It's not the most exciting job, but it pays the bills. The store is small, tucked between an old laundromat and a gas station, the kind of place people stop by for cheap snacks and last-minute party decorations. It's usually quiet, especially around closing time. That night, the air felt heavier than usual. Maybe it was the weather. The sky outside was dark, clouds thick like a storm was coming. The store was almost empty except for an old man browsing the snack aisle and a young woman near the greeting cards. I stood behind the register, tapping my fingers on the counter, waiting for my shift to end. At exactly 7:45 p.m., the old man shuffled up to the register. He placed a few items on the counter, a pack of gum, a can of soda, and a lighter. His face was wrinkled, his eyes dull. He didn't say a word, just watched as I scanned his items. I hit the button to print his receipt. The machine whirred, spitting out a long slip of paper. But something was wrong. Instead of listing his purchases, the receipt was filled with words I didn't understand at first. Then I read it. You will answer the phone in 5 seconds. My stomach tightened. What kind of joke was this? The store phone rang. I jumped, my heart slamming against my ribs. The man took his receipt, gave me a strange smile, and walked out the door without a word. I hesitated before picking up the phone. Hello? Static. Then a voice, barely above a whisper. Don't leave. I hung up the phone, my hands sweaty. My first thought was that someone was messing with me. Maybe a prank caller, maybe even that old man. But how could he have known the phone would ring? I grabbed the receipt and read the next line. A woman in a red jacket will enter the store. I frowned and looked up. The door chimed. A woman in a red jacket walked in. A cold shiver crawled up my back. I swallowed hard, trying to shake off the nerves. This was just a weird coincidence. It had to be. I forced a smile as the woman approached the counter. She placed a single item down, a small notebook. Is this on sale? She asked. I nodded, scanning it. My hands trembled as I hit the button for her receipt. Your shift will end in 5 minutes. You will not leave this store alive. My breath hitched. The woman looked at me, confused. You okay? I forced a nod, crumpling the receipt in my hand. Yeah, just tired. She paid and left. The second the door closed behind her, I smoothed out the receipt again, hoping I had misread it. I hadn't. I glanced at the time. 7:50 p.m. 5 minutes left. My heart pounded in my chest. This was crazy. Impossible. The store was empty now, just me and the sound of the buzzing lights above. I wanted to throw the receipt away, pretend none of this was happening, but I couldn't. I read it again. You will not leave this store alive. I tried to take deep breaths, but the air felt thick. I forced myself to move, to do something normal. I grabbed the broom and started sweeping, but my hands were shaking. I couldn't stop thinking about those words. A loud bang made me jump. It came from the stockroom. I stared at the door, my pulse racing. No one else was here. I had locked the stockroom earlier. Then, another bang. I took a slow step toward the door, my fingers tightening around the broom handle. Something wasn't right. I hesitated before pushing the door open. The room was dark, the only light flickering from an old bulb overhead. Boxes were stacked neatly, untouched. I took a cautious step inside. Then I saw it. The receipt printer was on the floor. Papers were scattered everywhere. And on the top of the pile was another receipt. I picked it up with trembling hands. Do not turn around. Every hair on my body stood up. My breathing stopped. A faint whisper brushed against my ear. David. I spun around, swinging the broom wildly. Nothing. The room was empty. But I knew. Something had been behind me. I ran back to the front of the store. My shift was over. I needed to leave. I grabbed my backpack and rushed to the door, but when I pulled the handle, it didn't budge. I yanked harder. The lock wasn't stuck. It was as if the door wouldn't let me out. I turned, heart hammering. The store was silent. The receipt printer whirred again. A new message. The lights will go out now. Darkness swallowed the store. I let out a shaky breath, reaching for my phone. The flashlight flickered on, casting a dim glow. I stepped backward, pressing against the door, my pulse racing. Then footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from the stockroom. I wasn't alone. The footsteps grew louder, closer. I fumbled with my phone, my fingers slick with sweat. The screen flashed, another text from an unknown number. You should have listened. A shadow moved near the aisles. My flashlight flickered. The air felt wrong, like something thick and heavy pressed against my chest. I turned toward the register, and there, sitting on the counter, was another receipt. I didn't want to read it, but I had to. My hands shook as I lifted the paper. Your story ends here. A cold breath touched my neck. I ran. I sprinted to the back exit, slamming my fists against the door. It wouldn't open. My screams echoed in the empty store. Behind me, the receipt printer kept printing, paper spilling onto the floor, line after line of unreadable words. The lights flickered back on. And there, standing in the middle of the store, was the old man, the first customer. He smiled. Told you not to leave. The last thing I heard was the receipt printer clicking one final time. Thank you for your purchase. You will not be returning. Then, everything went black. My name is Lucas, and I work the late shift at Dollar Tree. It's a quiet job, mostly just cleaning up after customers and making sure everything is in place before closing. Nothing exciting ever really happens here. The most I have to deal with is the occasional broken item or someone trying to pay with expired coupons. That night, the store was unusually empty. Not that I was complaining, I liked when it was slow. It meant I could get my work done faster. The only sound was the soft hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional rustling of items settling on the shelves. At exactly 10 p.m., I grabbed the keys from the register and started my final walk around the store. I checked the aisles, straightened a few things, and then made my way to the frozen section. That's when I noticed it. The freezer door was slightly open. I frowned. That was strange. We always made sure the doors were shut tight to keep the cold air in. Maybe a customer had left it open. I walked over, gripping the handle to pull it shut, but when I opened it wider, my breath caught in my throat. There was no frozen food inside. Instead, I was staring into a dimly lit hallway, the walls covered in peeling wallpaper. The floor was wooden, but the planks looked warped and rotting. Flickering candlelight cast strange shadows across the walls. This wasn't the inside of a freezer. This wasn't the store at all. I took a step back, my heart pounding. What was this? I should have shut the door. I should have locked up and left. But something about that hallway pulled me in. It didn't make sense. There was no way a freezer could lead to something like this. But the cold air spilling from the doorway wasn't the usual chill of frozen food. It felt wrong, like it didn't belong in this world. I leaned in slightly, peering deeper inside. The candlelight flickered, casting long, twisting shadows on the walls. The hallway stretched further than it should have, leading into darkness. There was something unsettling about the silence. It felt too still, like the world had stopped moving inside that space. A soft creak echoed from deep within. My stomach tightened. It wasn't from the store. It came from inside the hallway, like a footstep. I stepped back, my breath uneven. This was crazy. Maybe I was tired imagining things, but then I heard it. A whisper. "Come in, Lucas." I spun around. The store was empty. My name. It had whispered my name. I turned back to the freezer. The hallway was still there, waiting. The candlelight flickered again, and for a brief second I thought I saw something move in the shadows. I should have walked away. But instead, I took a step forward. My foot touched the wooden floor inside the hallway, and an immediate sense of dread washed over me. It felt real, too real. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of damp wood and something metallic like rust. I glanced back at the store, but it already felt far away, like I had stepped into another world entirely. The door to the freezer was still open behind me. I could still leave, but then the door slammed shut. I spun around, my heart pounding. The bright fluorescent lights of the store were gone. The only light came from the dim, flickering candles along the walls. I rushed to the door, gripping the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "Hello?" My voice sounded small in the hallway. Silence. The whisper came again, closer this time. "Keep walking." A shiver ran down my spine. The hallway stretched endlessly before me, its wooden planks creaking under my weight. The walls were covered in old, faded wallpaper, the patterns twisted and distorted like they had melted over time. I reached out, brushing my fingers against the wall, and the moment I did, something shifted beneath the surface, like something was moving inside it. I yanked my hand back. My breathing was uneven. I had to get out of here. I turned to run back to the freezer door. It was gone. Panic set in. The hallway had changed. The walls felt tighter, the space smaller. The flickering candlelight was the only thing keeping the darkness from swallowing me whole. I forced myself to move forward. There had to be a way out. The hallway opened up into a large, rotting room. The ceiling was high, wooden beams stretching across it like ribs. The floor was covered in dust, and the furniture looked old, as if it had been abandoned for decades. A long wooden table sat in the middle, surrounded by empty chairs. Something about the chairs made me uneasy. They weren't placed naturally. They were all facing the same direction, toward a single doorway at the end of the room. I swallowed hard. A cold breeze passed through, making the candles flicker wildly. And then, from the dark doorway, I heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Coming toward me. I took a step back, my chest tightening. The footsteps stopped just before the doorway. The darkness beyond it seemed to stretch endlessly, deeper than it should. Then, a hand reached out. It was pale, almost gray, with fingers too long to be human. The nails were jagged, broken, and covered in something dark. It gripped the edge of the doorway, holding on as if pulling itself forward. I couldn't move. My body refused to listen. Then, the whisper returned. "Stay." I snapped out of my trance, stumbling backward. The chairs scraped against the floor as I bumped into them. I turned and ran toward the hallway I had come from, but it wasn't there anymore. The house was shifting, changing. The candles blew out. I was trapped in the dark. I reached for the walls, feeling my way forward. My breathing was loud in the silence. The air was thick, pressing against me like invisible hands. Then, I saw it, a faint blue glow in the distance. The freezer door. I didn't question it. I ran. Behind me, the footsteps returned, faster this time. Something was chasing me. I could hear its breath, ragged and unnatural. The wooden floor groaned under its weight. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The glow got brighter. I reached out, my fingers grazing the cold metal handle. And then, just as I felt something grab the back of my shirt, I pulled the door open and fell forward. I hit the hard tile floor of Dollar Tree. The bright lights of the store made me squint. The cold air from the freezer spilled onto me. My chest heaved as I scrambled to my feet. I turned back. The freezer was normal again. Shelves lined with frozen dinners and ice cream. No hallway, no house. I stood there, my mind racing. Had I imagined it? Then I noticed something. On the floor, just inside the freezer, was an old wooden chair. And on it, carved into the wood, was a single word. Stay. My name is Ryan, and I work the night shift at Dollar Tree. It's not the worst job, but it can be exhausting. Most nights I just stock shelves, clean up, and wait for the clock to hit closing time. The store is usually quiet after 10 p.m., but there's something about being alone in a place that's supposed to be busy that makes the air feel heavier. That night had been especially long. Customers left a mess in almost every aisle, and I spent hours picking up crushed snack bags, putting back misplaced items, and mopping up spilled soda. By the time I finally locked the front doors and counted the cash register, it was 12:30 a.m. I let out a deep sigh, stretching my arms. My legs ached, my head felt heavy, and I just wanted to sit down for a few minutes before heading home. The break room was small and plain, just a round table, a vending machine, and a dented microwave sitting on the counter. A single mirror hung on the wall next to the door. I grabbed a cold soda from the vending machine, sat down, and leaned back in my chair. The silence of the store felt different now. Too thick, too quiet. I glanced at the clock. 12:31 a.m. Just 5 minutes, I told myself. Then I'd go home. I took a sip of my soda and looked up at the mirror. My reflection stared back, tired and drained. But then, something else caught my eye. There was a shadow standing behind me. My breath hitched. My whole body tensed as my eyes locked onto the reflection. The shadow wasn't clear. It was more like a shape. A dark figure standing just behind my chair. It had no features, no details. Just a tall, unmoving presence. My heart pounded against my ribs. Slowly, I turned my head. The room was empty. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe. My fingers tightened around the soda can. Maybe I was just seeing things. I was tired, drained. The store lights outside flickered sometimes. Maybe it was a trick of the light. But when I looked back at the mirror, the shadow was still there. Closer this time. I shot up from my chair so fast that my drink spilled onto the table. My pulse was racing, my skin covered in cold sweat. I spun around, scanning every corner of the small break room. There was nowhere for anyone to hide. No windows, just the door that led back to the store. But I knew what I saw, and it was still watching me. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it across the break room. The shadows stretched across the walls, but nothing moved. I ran my hand over my face, trying to calm myself down. Maybe I was just too tired. Maybe I needed to get out of here. I grabbed my backpack and headed for the door. Just as I reached for the handle, I heard it. A soft tap, tap, tap from the store. I froze. My stomach clenched as I held my breath, listening. The store was locked. I was the only one inside. But the footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, moving between the aisles. I swallowed hard and pressed my ear against the door. The sound of something shifting, something brushing against shelves, filled the air. I didn't want to go out there, but I had no choice. I pushed the door open and stepped into the store. The overhead lights flickered. The aisles stretched into dimly lit rows of shelves, casting long shadows across the floor. The store was supposed to be empty, but I wasn't alone. I stood still, my ears straining to catch any sound. The footsteps had stopped. The store was dead silent. I slowly walked toward the front, my shoes scuffing against the floor. My flashlight swept over the aisles, revealing nothing but shelves stocked with cheap toys, snacks, and cleaning supplies. Then, somewhere near the back, a whisper, a breathy, broken voice. "Ryan, stay." My chest tightened. The sound wasn't far. It was coming from the aisle behind me. I spun around, shining my light. Nothing. The whisper came again, this time closer. "Don't go." I turned toward the mirror at the end of the aisle. My breath caught in my throat. The shadow was there, but it wasn't behind me this time. It was staring at me from inside the mirror. I took a step back, my hands trembling. My reflection looked normal. Same tired eyes, same Dollar Tree uniform. But standing just behind my reflection was the dark figure. It wasn't just a shadow anymore. It had shape now. A human form, but not quite. Its arms were too long, its head tilted slightly as if studying me. Its hands pressed against the mirror from the inside. The light in the store flickered, and for a split second, I saw its face. Or rather, the lack of one. No eyes, no mouth. Just a blank, smooth surface where a face should be. I stumbled backward, knocking over a display of canned goods. The sound of metal hitting the floor echoed through the store. My chest was tight, my breathing sharp and ragged. Then the whisper came again, but this time it wasn't from the mirror. It was right behind me. I didn't think. I just ran. I sprinted toward the front doors, my shoes slipping against the tile. My hands fumbled for the keys in my pocket. The store lights flickered wildly now, casting quick flashes of light and dark. The whisper followed me, growing louder, more desperate. "Ryan, don't leave." I reached the front doors and yanked at them. They didn't budge. Locked. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly that I dropped them. They clattered against the floor. My eyes darted back toward the aisles. The shadow stood at the end of the aisle, unmoving, but I could feel it watching me. The lights cut out completely. Darkness swallowed the store. And then, footsteps, running toward me. I scrambled on the floor, grabbing the keys with trembling fingers. My body screamed at me to move, but I couldn't see anything. Then the lights flickered back on for just a second. The shadow was right in front of me. A wave of cold swept through my body, and I felt something brush against my arm, a hand that wasn't mine. I jammed the key into the lock and turned it. The door flew open, and I stumbled outside, gasping for air. The night was silent. The parking lot was empty. The streetlights buzzed faintly. I turned back to the store. Through the glass, I could see my reflection, and standing behind it, the shadow. It didn't move. It didn't chase me, but it was still watching. And as I took one last step back, my reflection did something I didn't. It smiled. My name is Rick, and I work the closing shift at Dollar Tree in Detroit. It's not the best job, but it pays enough to keep my fridge stocked. Most nights are the same. Quiet, slow, and filled with the same routine. Customers come in, grab their cheap snacks and party supplies, and leave without a second glance. Tonight felt no different. The store was mostly empty except for a few late-night shoppers wandering the aisles. The clock on the wall read 8:57 p.m., just 3 more minutes until I could lock up and head home. I leaned against the counter, flipping through my phone, when I heard footsteps approaching. I looked up and saw a man placing a few items on the register. Just a pack of gum, a soda, and a small candle. His face was plain, expressionless. His eyes were dull, almost lifeless. But something about them made me uneasy. "That all for you?" I asked, scanning his items. He didn't respond, just nodded slightly. The receipt printer whirred as I handed him his change. I tore the slip from the machine and glanced at it. "Don't look away." I frowned. That wasn't normal. Before I could ask the guy if he wanted his receipt, he had already walked out the door. Weird, I thought, tossing it aside. But then, the door chimed again. I looked up. The same man stood in front of me, placing the exact same items on the counter. I blinked, my stomach twisting. The soda, the gum, the candle, they were identical to what I had just rung up. Even the way he stood, his posture stiff and unnatural, was exactly the same. You were just here," I said, forcing a laugh. "Forget something?" The man didn't reply. He just stared, his face blank. I swallowed the lump in my throat and scanned his items again. The receipt printer whirred, and I tore off the slip. "Don't look away." My fingers tightened around the paper. My pulse quickened as I looked up. The man had already turned and was walking out. I stood there, gripping the receipt, my thoughts racing. The door chimed again. My breath caught in my throat. It was him. Again. Same soda, same gum, same candle, same lifeless stare. My hands shook slightly as I rang up the items. The receipt printer spat out the slip, and I forced myself to look. "Don't look away." A cold shiver ran down my spine. I lifted my eyes. The man was still standing there. This time he didn't leave. I took a slow step back, my legs suddenly weak. My skin prickled as the man stood in complete silence, his hands resting lightly on the counter. His eyes didn't blink. His mouth didn't twitch. I forced a nervous chuckle. "Hey man, you okay?" No response. My heart pounded as I looked at the receipt in my hand again. The words seemed bolder now, as if they were screaming at me. "Don't look away." I swallowed hard and took a shaky breath. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe this was some weird joke. I had to prove to myself that this wasn't real. I looked away. The lights flickered. A loud screeching noise tore through the store like metal scraping against concrete. My head snapped back toward the man. He was closer. His face was the same, blank, unmoving, but his body had shifted. His hands now gripped the edge of the counter tightly, his knuckles pale. His posture was hunched, leaning toward me. I stumbled backward, my heart racing. The store felt smaller, like the walls were closing in. I needed to get out. The door chimed. He was gone. I gasped for air, my hands gripping the counter to steady myself. The store was silent again, but something was wrong. My stomach churned as I slowly turned my head toward the receipt printer. It was still printing, one after another. Each slip of paper fell to the floor, all of them with the same words. "Don't look away." My breathing was uneven as I reached down and picked up a handful. The ink seemed darker now. The letters almost burned into the paper. The words were stacked on top of each other as if the machine was screaming at me. The door chimed again. I didn't want to look. I knew what I would see, but I had no choice. I lifted my head. He was there, and this time he was smiling. I stumbled back, knocking over a display of chips. The man's expression had changed for the first time. His lips curled into a grin, but his eyes remained empty. His teeth were too white, too perfect, like they didn't belong in his mouth. The receipt printer was still going, spitting out paper like it was alive. The noise filled the store, louder than it should have been. I glanced at the convex security mirror hanging from the ceiling. The entire store was visible in its reflection, except for the man. He wasn't there. I turned back, and he was still staring at me. My breathing became shallow. My fingers twitched, gripping the edge of the counter. The store lights flickered again, casting quick flashes of darkness and light. Then, the worst ring happened. The reflection in the mirror turned to face me. But I hadn't moved. My reflection stared at me, its eyes darker than mine, its movements slower. The fake me raised a hand. I didn't. A slow, jagged whisper filled the air. Don't. Look. Away. I ran. I sprinted toward the stockroom, my feet pounding against the tile. The door slammed shut behind me, and I pressed my back against it, my chest heaving. The noise outside stopped. Silence. My pulse was hammering in my ears. My mind screamed at me to get out, but my body wouldn't move. Then the whisper came again, right outside the door. "Open up, Rick." The door handle twisted. I braced myself, gripping the nearest shelf as the door slowly creaked open. I clenched my teeth, my body trembling. But the man wasn't there. The store was empty. The receipt printer had stopped. The floor was covered in crumpled slips of paper, but the words had changed. "Thank you for your purchase. You belong to us now." A quiet chime rang through the store. The automatic doors opened on their own, and standing outside under the dim parking lot lights was the man. He wasn't smiling anymore. He simply raised a hand and pointed at me. The lights flickered one last time, and then I was standing behind the counter. A customer walked in, placing a soda, a pack of gum, and a candle on the counter. I opened my mouth to warn them, but the words that came out weren't mine. "That all for you?"